welcome back to my channel. My name is Rachel. If you're new here, this is Constellation Library. So today we are going to be doing my March wrap-up. I read lots of things in the month of March, so I'd like to talk to you about all of those now. I do have my April TBR already posted. If you have not seen that yet, here is a link to it in the cards, or I'll put it in the description if I forget to put it in the cards, which is likely. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. I actually read 10 books in the month of March. I DNF'd one book, and then there were two that I did not finish. One that I started, one that I had been continuing from previous months. So total, I attempted to read 13 things, but I only read 10 of them. Genres, I have a lot of different genres this month. I read all over the place. I had one adventure, 2 paranormal, 4 fantasies, 1 nonfiction, 1 horror, 1 mythology, 2 romance, and then 1 contemporary. So mind you, I use Book Roast's call pile system to track all of my stats and all the information about the books that I read. So that's where I'm getting these genres from based upon, you know, what she has in her drop-down menus on her spreadsheet. Of everything, there was 1 middle grade book, 4 young adult books, and 8 adult books. Again, that is of the 13 things that I attempted. So 2 of the adult books were ones that I had already started but didn't finish, and then 1 of the adult books was a DNF. So truthfully, of what I read, it was 1 middle grade, 4 YA, and then 5 adult books. Of the books that I did finish, 3 of them were ebooks, 7 of them were physical books, and so there were 3 graphic novels, 1 novella, and then 3 physical novels among that 7. And then the books that I started but didn't quite finish, they were all physical books as well. So that's all the stats and all that kind of information for you. We're going to go ahead then and jump right in. So let me pull up Call Pile. If you see me looking down here, I'm looking at my computer. Okay, so the first book that I read, it was a graphic novel ebook of The Girl from the Sea by Molly Ostertag. So I've actually read from Molly Ostertag before. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it's The Boy Witch. I can't really see it from here. The Witch Boy. I was close. Anyway, I read that. I loved it. I had to own it. I bought my own copy of it, and it's part of a trilogy. The Girl from the Sea was, to me, not quite as good as that one was. I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Essentially, the premise of this book is that there is a girl who has a big group of friends, and she feels different from the rest of them because she is a lesbian, and she has not come out to any of her friends or her family or any of that. I think that her father either has died or has left and isn't in their lives anymore, so her and her mom and her brother live in this town by themselves. Her brother's going through some things because of what happened with the dad, and she's just kind of going through some things as well, trying to figure out who she is and how she fits in with her friends. And she actually falls into the ocean and almost drowns, and is saved by essentially like a seal person. Like, she's like wears a seal skin and when she's in the water, but she looks like a girl. She can take it off and look like a girl, and she can only come to shore for certain reasons at certain times. So she saves our main character with a kiss, and then becomes human and walks around and is essentially like a fish out of water in this town, and nobody knows who she is. And so our main character has to like cover for her and give her a story for why she's there. And it's just kind of an odd romance, I guess. And the plot was kind of odd for me personally. And there really wasn't anything like glaringly wrong with it. I just did not enjoy it as much as her other work. And I didn't think that it was as, I guess, engrossing. The characters were fine. I gave them a 6. The main character kind of frustrated me because of how she treated the love interest in this, because she obviously is not from this around here, and she feels like something else. It's like they have mixed ideas of what their relationship is, and because our main character doesn't want to come out to anyone yet, she tries to hide her relationship with the seal girl. And I mean, I believe that that is the reality for a lot of people in the LGBTQ community. when they are discovering their preferences and all of that. But I just didn't like how not nice she was to the girl that bothered me. The atmosphere was fine. I gave it a 7. I feel like it was decent. The writing I gave a 6 because, again, I didn't really feel like we were doing a whole lot of really interesting things. I feel like I had read several stories similar to this where we have to hide ourselves and we hurt the feelings of the people that we care about because of that. So it felt like something I'd read before. The plot I gave a 7. It was fine. It moved along. It didn't really slow down, but again, it was a story I'd heard before. The intrigue was a 7 and the logic was a 7. I mean, everything worked. I just didn't super like it. And then enjoyment I gave a 6 because, again, it was fine, but it wasn't great. And I feel like there are a lot of stories that are done with this type of topic are done a lot better. It's not for me though. So it doesn't really matter ultimately what I think about it, but I did think that it was just okay. The next book that I read was a really surprising read for me, one that I actually really enjoyed. Nobody's been talking about it that I've seen on BookTube. So yeah, I just saw it in the store, read the synopsis, was like, wow, that sounds really good, which is, it's been a while since I've done that, and I'm glad it worked out for me. Normally I get my information from BookTube or from Goodreads or whatever, reading the reviews of books and what people think before I pick something up. This one I was just like, I'm just gonna give it a shot. And that was Dark and Shallow Lies by Jenny Myers Sane. So this book I super enjoyed. It is a YA, it's like a paranormal mystery. So I really, really enjoyed this. I ended up giving it 5 stars. Because it's just everything that I want from a paranormal mystery. So basically the premise of the story is you have our main character, Gray. She is from a town half the year called La Cachette, Louisiana. And La Cachette is a fictional town in the story that sits right below New Orleans in the bayou. And in order to get to the town, you have to take an airboat back and forth between New Orleans and the town. The town is set up on like stilts in the bayou. It's a lot of like wooden walkways. There's no streets. You don't have cars here. It's just very small. You walk everywhere. It is essentially the psychic capital of the world. Everybody that lives in La Cachette has some sort of psychic ability, and they are basically a tourist destination. So airboats are constantly coming back and forth from NOLA in order to just visit and take advantage of all the psychic things that are available to them. There's tarot readings, there's mediums, crystals, all that kind of stuff that they can get from this town. And the mystery is that our main character was born on the same day as her best friend. She calls her twin flame. They were born at the same time on the same day. They were laid together and they're bassinet, and they had been inseparable ever since. But something happened last summer, and she and her twin flame ended up getting in a really big fight and had not been speaking. And our main character goes up to somewhere else in Louisiana to live with her father for half the year. We don't see anything regarding that. We just know that that's the thing that happens. So the story takes place totally in La Cachette. And so she comes back for the summer to try to figure out what happened to her friend, because after their fight, her friend ended up just going missing and nobody could find her, and still nobody has been able to find her, which is interesting in a town where everybody has some sort of psychic ability that nobody knows what happens to her friend. So the story kind of goes from there. A lot of suspects who could have had something to do with it, and just a lot of mystery and all those kind of like really great atmospheric elements that you think of when you think of somewhere in the bayou in New Orleans. There's a crocodile, alligator, I'm not sure which, I know there's a difference, but there is one of those big river beasties down there called Willie Nelson, and he's kind of a character himself in the story. The weather is a character, the setting is a character. It's just really lush and vibrant, and the atmosphere just, I felt like I was there, having been to New Orleans and felt like that sweltering, thick, hot, stuffy air that's down there, and the smell and the Spanish moss and all of that. Like, it just, to me, was really vibrant and really immersive. And the story itself I thought was great. I read this over the course of a day. I couldn't put it down. And it's really like exactly the type of book I like. There are people who may not like it because it doesn't check all their boxes, but it really did check literally all of my boxes. In terms of call pile ratings, it wasn't just 10 across the board to get the 5. I gave an 8 for the characters because there were some things with some of the characters that frustrated me. Some of their behaviors, there were some toxicity in this in terms of the relationships and the way that people treated each other that made some of the characters unlikable. It wasn't ever written poorly, but it just, for me, I didn't enjoy some of the characters, but it was minor. Like I said, I gave it an 8. Atmosphere, 10 out of 10. The writing I thought was really gorgeous. I gave it 10 out of 10. The plot, I gave a 9. There were a couple little things, like mostly towards the end, there was a lot of twists and turns at the end, which wasn't a huge deal. Like, it wasn't a bad thing at all, but when we finally settled on what the actual thing was, I was slightly disappointed in it, but not enough to take it out of a 5-star rating. So that's why that one got a 9. It wasn't perfect. Intrigue for me was a 10. I had to know what was going on the entire time. Logic was a 7, and that kind of ties into the end of the book. Some of the logic that led to where we are in the story, I felt was not logicking as well as it could have, but it wasn't bad. Like I said, it got a 7. And then my enjoyment was a 10. So the lower ratings aside, I loved this book, and I gave it ultimately a 5 out of 5. So the next book that I read this month is Gallant by V.E. Schwab. This is her newest book. I believe it came out on like March 1st or something. So it is a middle grade fantasy. This was one of my most, if not my most anticipated releases of the year. And sadly, I was a little bit disappointed in it. It was not a bad book by any stretch of the imagination. It still got some pretty good marks for me. I ended up giving it somewhere between a 4 and a 4.5. I can't say for sure. It's probably leaning a little bit more towards a 4 because it didn't quite do it for me, but I still really liked it. This is the UK edition. I have bought several editions of this because I was so excited about it. This one is from Illumicrate, so yeah. But anyway, I was super excited, and again, it's not a bad book, and I'll be keeping a copy of it. I'm not sure I'll keep all 3. The premise of this book is that you have Olivia Pryor. She is essentially an orphan that lives in an orphanage with a bunch of other girls, and she is not well liked due to the fact that she can't speak and has had run-ins with other girls there. She knows that her mother dropped her off there, left her essentially on the doorstep, but she doesn't know anything about her family. She has her mother's journal, and in this journal, she has some insight into who her mother was, and it looked like her mom kind of went mad. And you learn that very soon, that her mom's psyche was going downhill. And so she's living in this orphanage, and then one day a letter arrives for her asking her to come back to a place called Gallant. Now, her mother's journal tells her to never go to Gallant, and she doesn't know what Gallant is. But then she gets a letter from somebody inviting her to come back, and a car is sent for her, and so she ends up leaving behind this, lonesome world that she's lived in to go to Gallant, to her uncle, I believe, is who she receives the letter from. And when she gets to Gallant, there is the beautiful like manor house, and then there is a wall. And as you can tell from the book cover, there's 2 Gallants, one on either side of the wall, and one is basically the exact opposite from the other, very sinister sort of place. So that's pretty much all I can tell you without giving big plot points away. But the characters I felt were done super well. I gave them a 9. And Olivia, I guess you would say that she is mute. She doesn't speak at all. She can hear, but she does not speak, which is something that you don't really realize until you start reading. It doesn't say it anywhere in the synopsis, but you immediately learn this as soon as you start reading the book. And she doesn't speak at all, which I just really liked that. She uses sign language to communicate as best she can. Not everybody can communicate with her. There's a lot of just really great moments. I felt like they were great. They hurt my heart for the character, but I felt like they were great because people would shut her down and not listen to her by not looking at her, because if they weren't looking at her, then they couldn't see her hands and couldn't communicate with her that way. She can't even scream. She can't laugh. Like, it's just breath. She isn't able to make any noise. So I really, really liked that. But some of the other characters were just kind of extraneous. I didn't know what their purpose was, so that's why I couldn't give a full 10 for that. Atmosphere, as always, with Schwab was a 10 out of 10. Being in this house, you can't go out at night. The land wants to become, I guess, almost poisoned by what's on the other side of the gate. And so there's like gray, lifeless plants kind of growing up that have to be constantly trimmed down, and just various things. It's very interesting. But anyway, atmosphere, beautiful. The writing, beautiful. The plot, I gave this plot an 8 because I was not wowed by the plot. I did not think that it was very original. It read a lot like Neil Gaiman, which is not an insult. I like Neil Gaiman's work, but it felt like, if you've read Coraline, I got some Coraline vibes from it, and there were no surprises for me. I expected everything I was given, and honestly, like, that's not that like a bad thing, but it just didn't thrill me like I hoped that it would. I gave an 8 to Intrigue for the same reason. I, was interested in it because I was hopeful that it would be like a really crazy ending, and for me, it just wasn't. The logic, I gave an 8, and then the enjoyment, I gave an 8. So, I mean, not bad ratings. Somewhere between 4 and 4.5 stars for me for this. But, I mean, I would definitely recommend it. It isn't that I wouldn't. I think I just got myself hyped up and ended up getting disappointed because of that. So the next book that I read, I gave a really low rating to. This was our in-person book club's book for March, and it was an interesting decision. It wasn't, I can't say that it was objectively bad. I just did not enjoy it. It's won many awards. It is When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labatut. This is I labeled it as nonfiction because the first half of it is nonfiction, but the second half of it is like historical fiction, historical sci-fi, I guess. At least that's what you're led to believe. But it really just did not meet what I thought it was going to meet in terms of anything that it talks about in the synopsis, or what I was led to believe that this book was. It was originally written by a man from Chile, and it is in Spanish, and then was translated into English. So there's, I guess, could be things that were lost in translation, but it's not a very long book. It's less than 200 pages. It's like 190 pages maybe. And it was just, to me, I did not like it at all. I gave it a 1 for characters because there's some pedophilia in here, I'm just going to say. There is sexual assault in here. So several different triggers that really made me not give a shit about the characters because they were terrible people. It's based on real people. Schrodinger is the one in here that is disgusting. In the first half, when it's nonfiction, it talks a lot about cyanide and like all the poisons that were used during World War II and the people that created them and all of that, which was interesting because it was historical. Like, it was clearly nonfiction for that portion, but then when it switches over to the fiction is when stuff really gets gross, in my opinion. The atmosphere, there really wasn't any atmosphere because I don't feel like there was much of a plot to the story. I gave it a 5 for writing because the writing was good. I mean, it was fine. There wasn't anything wrong with it. And so I gave it the middle ground writing rating. Plot, I gave a 1, intrigue a 1, logic a 1, and I straight up gave it a 0 for enjoyment. I did not like this at all. There's nothing I can even say for it. It felt like a fever dream, and it was disgusting in a lot of ways, and just not a good time. I straight up was not having a good time. All right, so the next book that I read is Sundial by Catriona Ward. This was an adult horror novel. The premise of this book, you have your main character Rob and her daughter Callie, and Annie, I think is her other daughter, and then her husband Irving, and they have a really weird home life. Irving is an adulterer and cheats on her with everybody, but she just stays there because living with him is better than where she grew up. She grew up in a place called Sundial. It's out in the desert, and her sister Jack lived there with their father and their stepmother. Something had happened to their mother really young, and she had died, I think, in giving birth to them or something like that. And on this scientific commune that Sundial is, there were experiments done on dogs, and there were a lot of like graduate students from Harvard and Princeton and all of these sorts of places that would come to this to be part of these experiments. And essentially it was, can you control these dogs to basically create like a dog army that, you know, you can have control over. And the dogs were supposedly rescued from a place that was a puppy farm or puppy mill, whatever. And it factors into the story frequently as like this foreboding place that's no longer being used, but it's there, and they save the dogs from there. And so essentially the premise of the story is that Rob and her family life is screwed up. Her daughter Callie has an imaginary friend who we as the reader think is not imaginary, is violent and collects like small animal bones and carcasses and like hangs onto those things. And apparently this behavior was also done by Rob's sister Jack. And so Rob essentially takes Callie away from her husband and says, I'm taking her to Sundial so that I can help work her through this. And you don't know if she's going to kill her child or not. Like, it is heavily implied that she may kill Callie. She talks about she can't keep both of her daughters. And so she takes Callie out there, and there's a lot of will she, won't she, in terms of is she going to kill her, is she not? We learn a lot of Rob's past, so it goes back and forth between the past and the present once they get out to Sundial. And so you're seeing them there currently where it's just the two of them, Rob and Callie, and then you're seeing the past where it's everybody who was there, which is a whole shit ton of people. There are a lot of things in this book that I just do not like to read about. I do not like to read about child abuse and death, and I do not like to read about animal abuse and death. And so I go back and forth. Do I really like horror or not? Because I did not like this book at all, really. I ended up giving it somewhere in the neighborhood of a 2.5, because it just upset me to read it. And I didn't know that it was going to factor so heavily on those things when I started it. I figured out that I think my horror genre is more supernatural horror versus like human on human horror. And this book I thought was more supernatural horror just based on the description, the synopsis, and everything. And there is some of that, but no, not nearly enough to make up for everything else that happens in it. So for characters, I gave a 4. I didn't like or care about any of the characters. The main reason why I kept reading this book was to see if the kids were going to be okay. The atmosphere, I gave it a 6. Sometimes it was really good and immersive, especially when they were out in Arizona. Other times it wasn't. The writing, I gave a 6. It was okay writing. It wasn't bad, but the style wasn't really something that I liked. It was, you'd have to read it. I don't really know how to describe it, but I didn't super love it. For plot, I gave it a 4. Intrigue, I gave it a 4. And logic, I gave it a 4. I didn't feel like the way that it went made a whole lot of sense to me, especially the ending. I didn't like the way the ending was done, and I was not that intrigued by the story. It was kind of an effort to keep reading it. And so my enjoyment overall was a 3. There were points when I was like, okay, this is really creepy, but then it would put something really just fucked up in there that like I just didn't like. So that's why I'm like, do I like horror? Do I not like horror? I don't really know. This horror though I did not like. So 2.5 stars max for Sundial. The next book is called Oaksie, and I am not going to attempt to pronounce the author's name because I will totally mangle it, but it is a graphic novelization of a Finnish folklore, I guess, folk tale. It, I believe, is based on their like beliefs. So like the folk beliefs of the people in Finland. I think that that is what this is based off of. I wish that I liked it more than I did. The art was really great, but the problem that I had with it was that the story itself didn't feel like logical, and maybe that's because it is folklore and folklore doesn't always make sense. Mythology doesn't always make sense. So this was a mythology graphic novel, and I gave it, for characters, I gave it a 3. I really just didn't connect or care about the characters. They were all pretty terrible. I honestly don't even know if I can really give you a synopsis of it. It's about like a forest spirit and being raised as a bear, and the mother bear is like an incarnation of a spirit, and so she gave birth to this little spirit that doesn't look like a bear. It looks like a little flame, and ends up like, I don't even know, like they travel through this forest. There's these other spirits that look like people that are created by some larger spirit, and they want to kill the bear. And it's just, please don't take as I'm disparaging the myth, because I'm really not. I just don't fully understand it because I don't feel like it was easy to follow, I guess. Like, I'm very interested in mythology of other cultures, but I had a hard time understanding what the overall myth was, what it meant for people, why it's important to the culture, what the story is. It was just, there was not enough words, there were a lot of pictures, and so like the pictures were beautiful, but there wasn't enough text to really explain what was happening or give context for anything. So like I said, characters were a 3, atmosphere was an 8 because the art was really pretty. The writing was a 5 because, like I said, I didn't know what was happening. The plot and the intrigue, I gave 7s because like what I got of the plot was fine. I didn't mind it, but I don't feel it was enough for me to fully grasp the gravity of this myth and why it's important. Logic was a 2, and I think that maybe just is by nature of being a myth. Like, a lot of myths are not logical and don't make a lot of sense. And so my overall enjoyment, I gave it a 5, which puts it at a solid 3 stars. It's beautiful, and I would not deter anyone from reading it, and maybe somebody else would get more out of it than I did. The next one is called Fangs. It was also a graphic novel that I got from the library, and this is more of an new adult sort of graphic novel, and it's kind of like vignettes or serializations of comics. Like, it could be a comic because Sarah Anderson is one who does it, and she does Sarah Scribbles and has like serialized little comics that she'll put out, and I think Fangs was one of those. And it's about a vampire girl and a werewolf boy, and they're dating, and just little vignette stories on like one 3 or 4 panel thing about their life. I liked them both. I thought that they were super cute characters, so I gave them an 8 for that. The atmosphere, I gave a 9 because I felt like the art was really good at like showcasing where they are, and it wasn't just their faces, there was actually scenery behind them. The writing, I gave an 8. It was fine. There was nothing wrong with it. The plot, I gave a 7 because there was some plot, but it wasn't really connected. Like, you could see where veins, it sort of had an overarching connection, but not really. So I gave it a 7 for that. Intrigue and logic and enjoyment, all 9s for me. Everything made sense why it was done. The intrigue, I thought it was super cute and wanted to keep reading. I just enjoyed it, so it ended up getting a 4.5 out of 5 from me. I'm pretty happy that I read it. It's one of those that's been on my TBR for a while, and it was a super quick read. I maybe read it in half an hour, but I had a great time. I'd recommend it. The next book is one that I was not expecting to love as much as I did. After reading the first one, I was like, they can't possibly give me something better than the first one. Well, I was wrong, and that is Hook, Line, and Sinker by Tessa Bailey. So at the end of last year, I want to say it was maybe the last book that I read for 2021, and it was the first book in this series, which is It Happened One Summer, and I really liked that one. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, but I loved this one. I loved it so much that I feel like I can't, in good conscience, keep the 5-star rating for the other one, because this one is so, to me, demonstrably better that it needs a 5, and they're not on the same level. So I might have to go back and lower my rating, which I hate doing, but I feel like it's necessary. So the premise of this book, in order to kind of understand it, you need to understand the first book. So the first book is from the perspective of Piper Bellinger, who is a very rich it girl in LA. She gets into some trouble and is essentially sent to live in this fishing town where her biological father is from by her mom and stepdad because of the trouble that she's caused. They're essentially sending her here with, a lump sum of money to figure out how to live on her own and appreciate things a little bit better than she does. Her sister Hannah, who is right here, goes with her because she doesn't want her to be alone. And while they're there, Piper meets Brendan, who is captain of a fishing boat. He's very surly, very grumpy sunshine kind of dynamic. He is a man of routines. He, in fact, has been wearing his deceased wife's, the wedding ring from his deceased wife for like the last 7 years since she's been dead. So it's very hard for him to move forward. There's a lot of expectations placed on him. And that's their romance is in the first book. Fox is Brendan's first mate, and Hannah is Piper's sister, and so the two of them meet in the first book by extension of Brendan and Piper being together. And there's a little bit of an inclination that you think Fox might like Hannah in the first book. So the second book, though, much like the first, Hannah is obsessed with this director that she works with in making movies and soundtracks and all of that. She mentions being in love with him in the first book. She's still in love with him at the start of this book. But her and Fox have been texting over the summer ever since she was in Westport, which is the fishing village that they stay in. Ever since she was there, her and Fox have been texting as friends. And so this one is more of a friends to lovers romance, and I love that. That's my jam. I love a friends to lovers romance. And I just think that these two characters mesh so well together, and Fox is so, to me, understandable and relatable by comparison to Brendan. While I did really like Brendan, I felt like Fox was just, I don't know, he just really got to me. I enjoyed him. I like Hannah better. She's a lot more relatable as well because she's the more down-to-earth of the two sisters. And it was just a great time. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I felt like their relationship was really believable and their romance was really believable. And I don't know. I don't want to tell you too much of the premise of this one, other than the fact that the romance is between them, because I don't want to give anything away, but I definitely recommend it. I would say read the other one first, just so you have that context and basis for their relationship in this one. I think if you were to start with this one, you might be like, why are they friends? Because you don't have that basis from before. I gave it 10s across the board. So this to me was like the perfect book. I can't think of anything I didn't like about it. So yeah, 5 out of 5. Loved this one. The next book that I read, I actually sat in the middle of a Books & Co. and just read it while I was there. And that was Ain't Burned All the Bright by Jason Reynolds. I didn't expect it to be as short as it was. Like, I read it in maybe 15 minutes. And it doesn't look short, but it's got just a couple words on each page. I hesitate to call it a graphic novel because it's more of like a mixed media artwork project where everything was like cut and pasted on. It looks almost like scrapbooky, kind of like collage, I guess would maybe be the right word to say. But the premise of it is that it's, I think, essentially from the perspective of somebody living through the pandemic, and it's of a, not just somebody, of a Black person living through the pandemic, living through all of the stuff that happened with George Floyd and all of the with his, his murder, and then the subsequent rioting and picketing and what's the word I'm looking for, protesting that happened, and the fact that it all takes place in this person's house, and they're seeing everything on the news, and they keep wondering, like, why are we not changing the channel? I think that the father in the story has COVID and he's sick in the other room, and the sister is going to go walk in the protest, and so there's a lot of different moving parts in it for what it is, and it doesn't seem like it at first glance. But it was gorgeous. It was written so well for what it was. I did give it 5 out of 5 stars. The only areas for me that didn't get 10s were characters and plot. And that was just because you really didn't see any characters. Like, you knew that there was a sister and a brother and a mother and a father, but you weren't able to flesh it out or know anything about them based upon the type of story that it was. And I would have liked to have seen a little more of them in whatever way would have been feasible. I also gave an 8 to plot because of the fact that there was not really like a story per se. It was just like a poem, which is a lot of what Jason Reynolds does. He writes in verse, and so it was just like one kind of long poem over like 200 some pages. But it was great, and it still got 5 out of 5 stars, so those are negligible little things. So I would definitely recommend it, but it was great. It was wonderful. Please look it up. The next thing that I read was actually a reread for me, and that is the Hermione fan fiction that I read last year, Breath Mints and Battle Scars. I love this. I didn't intend to reread it, but man, I had a great time. I loved going back into the world. Onyx and Elm is the author of this. It's on AO3. I think you could probably also find it on fanfiction.net. I'm not sure, but I find it on AO3. and it's just done so well. And it makes their relationship believable, and it makes the characters that you hated in the original Harry Potter stories, it humanizes them. And it's just great. Like, it's great. So, and that one also gets 10s across the board for me because I feel like it's so well done. So yeah. The next book that I read, and this is actually my DNF, so I didn't finish it. I did start it, and it was right at the end of the month that I started it. And that is The Atlas 6 by Olivier Blake. I wanted so badly to like this. I got about 45-ish% of the way through it, and I just stopped caring. I stepped away from it for like an afternoon and came back to try to read it, and just, I didn't care. I didn't care about any of the characters. The premise of this is that Atlas Blakely is a man who is a representative of the Alexandrian Society, which is an underground organization that is not known to anyone except for the people that it approaches, that maintains the missing Library of Alexandria, which isn't actually missing, it just moves from place to place. And so every 10 years, I think, they gather 6 people to be essentially compete with each other, because only 5 make it through, to be caretakers of the Library of Alexandria, essentially. So you get this story from each of the 6 people who are potentially going to be one of the 5. And I did not like any of them. I did not like any of the characters. They're insufferable. They're snobby. The story itself, and I imagine it needs to be this way given the fact that it's about the Library of Alexandria. Like, it needs to be kind of highfalutin, hoity-toity, elitist type of writing. It is smart, and it needs you to know that it's smart. And the characters are super intelligent and super powerful and better than you. Like, these are all the vibes that I got from this. It felt very much, I'm gonna rub them in your face how intelligent I am and how complex I am for each of the characters. I just didn't vibe with it. It was not my thing. It's very much, I think, dark academia, but like to the nth degree, like super intense academia. And I don't have anything nice to say, I guess. So I'm not going to say anything else. I ended up skipping to the end of the book, and I just found that I didn't care what the big reveal was. I was like, that's what we chose it to be? Well, that was a choice. And no, I don't recommend it. I don't think, like, I can understand why people enjoy it. I can understand the things that draw some people in, but I was not drawn in. In fact, there were things that I think other people liked that actively repelled me. And I don't rate my DNFs because I don't think that's fair to the author. I'll tell you why I DNF'd it and why I didn't like it. But if I don't finish a book, I'm not going to rate it. So that one doesn't have a rating. But I probably, if I finished it, it definitely would not get over 3 stars for me because I know how it ends. But I'm not going to give it a rating on Goodreads because I don't think that's fair for having not actually start to finish finished it. So the last 2 things were books that I either started or continued in March. The one that I continued was, as you guessed, Brandon Sanderson's Words of Radiance. As I've said the last couple of months, I'm just slowly picking my way through this. I'm like 60-some% of the way through, so I'm over halfway. But I had taken a step back to read a few other things, and I hope to finish this in April. We'll see. We'll see if it happens. But that's a goal. I want to finish this if I can in April because I want to start Oathbringer, which will take me 3+ months to finish. So it is what it is. But I started that one, or continued that one. And then the one that I started that I hope to continue in April and maybe finish is A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. I really like this, and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to continue to like it. And I am interested in the story. I'm about 100 pages in, and it's enjoyable. This book is, visually, it's gorgeous, but also the writing is quite immersive and lyrical and just enthralling. Like, I thoroughly am enjoying myself with this one, but I had several different books happening at the same time that I was trying to get through. So I just like kind of read the shortest ones, and then by the time, you know, this one came back up to being an option, it was the end of the month, and I was like, you know what, it's fine, I'll just do it for April. I'm not going to kill myself trying to finish it the last day. So yeah, that's everything that I read and everything I attempted to read in the month of March. So this video is probably super long. If it is, I'm very sorry. If you got here, put an eyeball in the comment section to show that you made it to the end of this video. Let me know. I know that some people really love some of these books, especially the Atlas 6, which I didn't love. And let me know your thoughts. Let me know why you liked them, all that sort of thing. But I appreciate you guys so much for being here. I appreciate you for watching this super lengthy video and listening to me share all of my opinions. So if you enjoyed, please feel free to like and subscribe. And then I will be back with you guys in some indeterminate amount of time with another video. I do have a spring haul on the way. I just need to gather up everything to film that one. And there are a couple of other videos that are percolating and popping around in my head that I do plan to film soon. But until next time, I hope you guys have a great April, and I will see you later. Bye.